So it seems that server side and Signals sounds like a match made in heaven, and I can see that a lot of other frameworks are jumping on this trend, and everyone is going server side basically. React is introducing server side components. Angular is working with hydration, also Signals, and but do you think that what is the main thing that is convincing everyone to go this way? Is this performance only, or there is more to that?
I think there's more to it, but I think you have to kind of look at it from a historical point of view, right? Which is that all the frameworks we have today that are popular that we have today are fundamentally client-side rendered frameworks, right? And they all have, when you have a client-side rendered framework, you have the problem of like, oh, I have a white screen, and then I eventually have an application running, and then what do I do while the white screen is kind of shown to the user? And so this is where server-side pre-rendering comes in. And there's different strategies, but they all basically are working around the fact that the framework wants to do everything on the client, right? Like all these frameworks that we have, fundamentally, they are full client-side rendered frameworks. And the kind of the showing of the SSR code ahead of time is a bit of a workaround to kind of solve this. So I think Qwik is unique in the sense that it says, no, like we can certainly do client-side rendering, but that's not the thing, right? Like fundamentally, Qwik focuses on SSR first. It's all about, how do we get the most performance out of the client because we want to delay execute as much as possible, which means we have to lean super, super heavily unified execution model, right? So if you have existing frameworks, there's a distinction between a framework running on a server or doing the server-side pre-rendering and framework running on the client. For example, in React, the use effects don't run, right? And so you have to kind of think about it like, well, the application runs differently on a server than in the client. Certain things cannot be done, etc. And Qwik makes a point like, actually, there is no difference. The code that runs on a server and the client are the same exact code. And not only that, if you look at the life cycle of a component, like if you have a component, the component has, a on init or a, what is it called, on mount and on mount, right? With normal frameworks, the way you would do this, the on mount happens on the server, and then on mount happens on the client. So this is what we mean by it's kind of unified. Like you don't think of it as, oh, this is a server execution, and then there is a client execution. Instead, it's like it's just your application running, and just some parts just happen to run on the server, and some parts then get transferred and happen to run on the client. But it's kind of unified in the way you're thinking about it. And so I think those two things, the super, super heavy reliance on SSR and this unified execution model I think are pretty unique and innovative bits that other frameworks kind of don't have.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to step back further for a moment, like motivation comes from the fact that like realize that there's a limit. Like if as long as we keep on saying like we're going to have this like client first mentality, we're going to probably just continue to load more and more JavaScript. We've seen this happen for years. No signs of slowing down. At a certain point, frameworks realized that they needed to provide tools for people to be able to offload some of that work to the server to various degrees to get a better user experience. I think the problem is that the basic SSR showed that, ironically, it didn't actually lighten our JavaScript payloads. In fact, if anything, it might have made it even larger because now you need code that can both client render and can hydrate. So, like, essentially, I think we got to a point where we tried a lot of different things that were simple, low-hanging fruit, and for the most part, didn't actually accomplish the reduction of this cost that we'd been hoping for. That's my perspective on it. So, in terms of the isomorphism and the life cycles, that argument doesn't speak to me as much because I think that's arbitrary on the framework to decide like where their life cycles run. Like the fact that use effector on mount runs on the client, I think is a very good thing, and because it tells you that like, look, you can have expectation that you can interact with the DOM here. If you put the DOM on the server, yes, you can do some kind of fancy stuff if you want, but there's a brittleness of most isomorphic solutions right now, which is why SSR is kind of hard. Why you need a framework, all this stuff is because to a certain degree, it's one of the easiest things where a slight mismatch gets wrong, gets things to go wrong. I'm kind of happy with actually a lot of new innovation, because what it's effectively doing is, even if the mental model is single app or very client versus server like Astro or React Server Components, like what side you fall, which I think is the philosophical debate for the future right now. The effective thing that's happening is we're actually shrinking the size of the isomorphic code for the most part, with all the work that we are doing to optimize this stuff, whether it's through Qwik realizing that, hey, this part of the app is not stateful, it never needs to get to the browser, or through things like RSCs, which you can go make that move. You're actually shrinking the size of the isomorphic part of the app, and in so you're actually making the app more resilient. In at least where my thinking is, it's there is an interesting thing about running code on both sides and expecting it to act exactly the same, the way we package and bundle up libraries, but it's definitely been a source of bugs and confusion. I'm glad that, in a sense, we are addressing this indirectly. I don't know, I tangented a little bit here, but I think from a basis, what's actually whether the intention or not, what's actually happening is we are effectively taking parts of our application and being able to say, this does not need to ever go to the browser, so to speak. Which, as I said, is why each different technique has interesting merits and benefits, right? Like we talk a lot about initial page load when talking about things that are usually used in MPAs, when you're talking about Astro, when you're talking about Qwik even. And then there's a lot of the exploration that's been going on recently is actually stuff like server components, which is like, can we actually keep this sort of experience as we client navigate through pages? It's an interesting question of whether it's worthwhile. So far, we've seen that it might not be, but I think this is part of what makes the exploration right now so interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is getting interesting, and I can see that there are some things emerging in here. Like, we have this older generation of client first frameworks and the new generation of server side first frameworks. So that's at least how I understand it right now, and I'm wondering if those client side frameworks can keep up with the change.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? Like the thing is, I just want to throw out here, the client side frameworks obviously not being able to necessarily do a complete rewrite, but the, things that wrap them, things like islands or server components, are a different mechanism to maybe not eliminate hydration costs, but reduce them significantly. In theory, I'm going to say in theory because we haven't seen in practice this necessarily deliver in all cases, but there are paths forward for the client-oriented frameworks, in my opinion, at least.
I want to add to that. I think all of this work that has been done for kind of how do you solve that? And so the answer to that is like, well, if you just had components, the answer was simple. You just share state, and that's how good send custom events between them. That's certainly a solution. The point I'm trying to make here is like, yes, but now you, as a developer, I have to really think about it in two different ways, right? Am I talking to a component that's next to me in the same island, in which case I talk in this particular API, or am I talking component that's far away, which is in a different island, in which case I have to use a different kind of API, right? And there is a cost to that as a developer, I might not wish to pay. And the other problem is that, like, in order for the other component to listen to the DOM events, well, it kind of has to hydrate, right? Because yes, all these things are improving the situation, but they're also creating complexities that might not be necessarily obvious at the beginning. But if you wanted to build a serious applications, you're going to run into these complexities and you're going to have to deal with them in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes forget that Astro kind of has taken the definition of island, and that's what people think of now. Because for me, when I think islands, I still think Marco, like Marco 4, like 2017, and what Marco does, and similar to React Server Components, is you can have an island-esque framework that you can add some interactive pieces to your stuff. It's not even about, in my opinion, lazy loading or delaying hydration. It's about doing less of it.